Welcome to Hope Channel International. This video talks about the impact the Great Disappointment had on the church and what happened to the Protestant faith as a result.
What Miller got wrong was an understanding of the event that was going to happen in 1844. He assumed by his reading of Scripture that the cleansing of the sanctuary meant that Jesus was going to literally come and cleanse the earth with fire. Those who followed in the months and years after 1844 began to realize that a reference to the sanctuary in Scripture was a reference, in fact, to the sanctuary, not the earth, that the sanctuary in heaven, there must be something happening there that was significant at or about the time of 1844.
Okay, so they go back, they re-examine it. This group has not utterly lost faith. They realize there is a mistake from Miller. There has got to be a mistake. The sanctuary is not the earth. They get into studies of passages like Hebrews chapter 8, realizing that there's a sanctuary in heaven after which the earthly sanctuary was patterned. They see the flawless logic and they realize we're not entirely wrong. There is something here to cling to. And I think last week we looked at that and realized that a reference to the cleansing of the sanctuary was actually a tie back to Leviticus 16 right. And the Day of Atonement, which was a ceremonial day of judgment that came by once a year. Everything there pointed to the judgment, which the Bible teaches comes just before the second coming of Christ. So the earth actually has moved into the last period of history. But so that's one group. And you've mentioned the others that kind of lost faith, went back to but as we look at religion in America as a whole, 1844 becomes something of a turning point for American Christianity.
In fact, many scholars who look at the history of religion in the 19th century in America would use either that year or one shortly after it to look at a sort of ending of the Second Great Awakening. Some scholars will take it as long as 1860. Most would say about 1850 as the terminus of that period of awakening that we have called the Church of Philadelphia. Everyone agrees that while Christianity and specifically Protestantism continued to grow expansively, that the connection to the biblical word of truth, the connection to the dynamic which had driven the growth of Protestantism in the previous century was beginning to wane. Protestantism was beginning to look a lot like Western culture, and increasingly it took on the values and the spirit of the culture in which it thrived.
And it was actually reflected in the life of those churches, if I remember. I brought historical references
Yes.
tonight. Look at the homework I have done, people. I knew I was going to be with Bill Knott, and I had to do some homework. But there are some writing. Mr. Barnes, the author of a commentary in Philadelphia, noted in 1844, he said, something's changed. He writes, there are no awakenings, no conversions, not much apparent growth in grace and professors of the Christian faith, that is. None come to the pastor's study to converse about the salvation of their souls. Others in the religious telescope in that year say, we've never witnessed such a general declension of religion as at the present. So it seems to me that we've got two groups. Well, we've got a number of groups, but we've got some groups that say there is something here and we must not lose faith. Jesus is coming. We've got another group that says there's nothing to it. And in that group, we actually see a decline in faith.
While you can point to individual city revivals that happened in the 1860s and the 70s, and you look at the work of Charles Spurgeon and D.L. Moody ultimately, what you don't see is the kind of culture-wide awakening or revival that had characterized the previous century, decade after decade, in regions all around the United States, Great Britain, and Europe. And in fact, by the time you reach the end of the 19th century, though Protestantism has outstripped all of its rivals among Christian faiths, it has grown vastly in numbers, but it has also grown large and wide and easy and standing for very little of the biblical mandate for truth.
So actually, if we want to put it on a chart, if we just want a PowerPoint presentation with a bar graph or a line graph, things are going well.
Things look very good from a numerical point of view. In fact, a statement you could put in the mouth of the Protestant church at the end of the 19th century is that it was rich and increased in goods and having need of nothing, which is exactly why it ties to the message of Revelation 3.
Absolutely. And in a moment, we're going to get into the letter to the church of Laodicea, but you are making an important point, and I don't want to miss it. Quality in Christianity is not always about numerical growth or numerical strength or visible indicators of growth.
I might say, to refine that, it is rarely about those things. Jesus is looking for individual hearts, not mass movements. Jesus is making his appeal, as he does in Revelation 3, to individual hearts. He isn't counting as the world counts.